Welcome to the Paulycast with your host, Paul Samuel Dolman, student, seeker, and the author of Hitchhiking with Larry David. Now sit back, relax, and get conscious. Enjoy the show.
Well, greetings, Paulycast listeners. The Paulycast is returning with a whole new guest, Miss Teri Pugh, who is a grief specialist. She deals with people grieving and helps people during that process. We brought her in because we just got to look at our ratings, and they're so low. We were grieving, so we thought maybe we'll bring a professional grief person in to help me. Terry's probably laughing in the background. It's okay to laugh on the air.
I am laughing.
I think laughter probably helps the grieving process. I look at these numbers and I thought we need a grief specialist. You know when I could have really used you is when my hair just went away. I thought I went to I needed a grief specialist for that.
Absolutely. I could have helped with that.
You could have helped me work through it.
Absolutely.
That was my first experience of truly letting go. And then, of course, my love life has really reinforced that lesson in pretty much every year since, sadly. All right, enough of being serious. Let's talk about death. No, I'm kidding.
Right.
Thanks for being here. You do wonderful work. Will you tell people like myself what exactly is a grief specialist?
Well, what I do is I help folks connect the dots, figure out where their grief is rooted. Surprisingly, Paul, everybody thinks that grief is, or they want to think or believe because of kind of social stigmatisms, that grief is just about a physical death. But we grieve losses. Grief is what we feel. Loss is what we experience. So there's the grief about your hair falling out. There's the grief about the relationships. There's financial grief. My job is to kind of help folks navigate through that so that they can reconnect and reclaim a sense of peace and self.
So it comes in many forms.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
How do you, is there a process? Do you have, is it more you make, is it like an improvisation as a jazz musician, or do you have certain bedrock solid steps that, I know there's the different stages of grief, and how do you move through it?
Well, there are the different stages of grief, and those different stages of grief were initially founded on the principles of someone with a terminal illness dying. So what we've done is we've taken these stages of grief and we've tried to apply them to everything that happens in the avenues of a loss in our life, and they're not applicable in all those arenas. So yes, there are certain core things that we look for: willingness, awareness, communication, self-care, forgiving and releasing. Those are the staples of being able to navigate this bumpy and sometimes overwhelming terrain that we call the grief field. But it is a very organic process because no grief is the same, and everyone experiences it in their own personal way.
How is grief different from sadness?
It's on a different level. Sadness is one of those things where sadness is that emotion where it kind of it comes in at the side, and people will say, "Oh, I'm really sad about that." But it's more, sadness is more of a passive emotion, if that makes sense. Grief actually anchors in. Grief, we know that we're grieving when it starts to affect our daily lives. Like if we're not doing things that we normally would do, a lot of times, for instance, I'm giving a talk pretty soon, and one of the points of reference that I use is the fact that there are 403,000 children in the U.S. foster care system. So those children haven't necessarily experienced the death of a loved one. Some probably have, but most of them have had seeds planted from early on about a deficit of self-worth or love or appreciation. So as they grow, those seeds will cultivate, and they can literally grow up with a limited perception of their worth, which can leave them in a grief that they're not even aware of. Grief is a very sneaky thing.
That's deep. I see an epidemic, or I would say just there's such a lack of self-love and self-worth, and I see it playing out in unhappiness, grieving, addictions,
absolutely,
violence, or just self-violence. And how, if someone was listening right now in a darker place, what would you advise them? How do I increase my self-worth, my self-love? Not worth so much as how do I take better care of myself, increase my self-love?
It is. It's increasing the self-love. And I'm with you. I don't particularly care for the word worth because that implies that there's a check and balance kind of thing. And my personal opinion is that we're all born whole, perfect, and complete. And our life circumstances or experience do not take away from our value. They may dink us a little bit and sting a little bit, but it's how we handle those situations. And for individuals that find themselves in a place that is very challenging for them, the first thing to know is that despite what you feel, you truly are not alone in that. There's obviously different levels of individuals and the darkness of what people feel, but a lot of times we go through life just in this uncomfortably comfortable, numb state, where we're just kind of going through the motions. You know, we're not really plugged in. And what I would say to someone who feels like they're in that place is to really sit back and listen to their inner voice. And that sounds a little woo-woo to a lot of people, but the reality is we all have our answers inside us. And if we can just calm that chaotic mind and really sit there and listen to what our higher self is telling us, we, believe it or not, can navigate our way out of anything.
I love that you're pointing people inward in the process, and the fact that almost like a deep ocean, as the tides of day-to-day life come and go, it doesn't affect the depth of who you are or the worth. You have to just tune in. And I think when we tune in and listen to our voice, it tells us whether a job or a relationship isn't working. We know already, but the deeper we tune in, we know. And so you're guiding people back into themselves. The answers don't lie outside of you. They're within you.
They are within. They are definitely within.
I went through a breakup a few years ago. My process was luckily, I've had a great healer. I had friends. I had a coach. I leaned on everybody. I meditated. And still, you know, you go through the period where you lose some weight. It's a little harder. Even if you know it's not right, it's tough. Breakups, and I remember reading divorces were actually harder to deal with than death for people.
They are.
They are. What if someone? What would you tell someone right now who just went through a terrible divorce? All divorces are terrible, even when you know it's bad.
Well, even when you know it's bad, whether it's a divorce, whether it's a death, or whether it's a breakup in a long-term or a short-term relationship, my answer to that is really comes from more of a universal or a spiritual pocket nugget, you know, like little bucket of nuggets or something. Most people don't want to hear that there is a universal flow of things that happen, and things do, because it is life. Things do come to an end, and that may be relationships or a life or a job or whatever. But to lean into the notion that just because that chapter is closing does not mean that something grander is not just beyond your sight. I think we lose sight of that because we want to oftentimes hang on. And when we're hanging on because of our own unresolved griefs, whether those are limiting beliefs or fears or abandonment, or it's just, there's endless amounts of things, that we can hang on to if we're not numbing out from. But, relationships, it's painful. It hurts when one ends, but there is always a tomorrow in that. And in that there can be endless possibilities. So
the broadening of scope is key, and the magic ingredient for all of us, I think, is hope. When we have hope, we rise. If it can rain a few days in a row, we can get a little down, but if we know sooner or later the sun's going to shine, we can ride it out. If we thought it's going to rain for the rest of our lives, it's like that's when you feel crushed. So you have to open up that perspective of, and this too shall pass.
Mm-hmm. What I tell people often is that it's kind of like visualizing yourself if you were full of helium and you were in a room with a ceiling, and you float to the top and you hit the ceiling, and you bounce back down and you float to the top and you hit the ceiling. Well, or in a car with a sunroof, until you crack the sunroof open, you're never going to surpass that, that ceiling, that limit. And grief has a way of keeping us kind of in a holding pattern. And oftentimes we get so familiar with bumping into the ceiling that we just adapt and believe that the ceiling is the end of the line. Like there's nothing beyond that. But you and I both know that there's so much beyond that.
Feels infinite, right? I mean, the infinite possibilities. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's a willingness. More so than anything, I believe that it's a willingness to lean into a new normal.
Oh, I love that. Leaning into a new normal. And for me, being with people, being authentic, being real, saying, not when people say, how are you? Fine, and you? Fine, and you? Saying, oh, man, this is tough. Or that happened and I was disappointed or devastated. That's always helpful to really just put it out there and be real. Maybe not ad nauseum or to total strangers, but to your, you know what I mean, people who won't stop talking about it. The other thing is movement, exercise, and then almost like become my own best friend, where it's like, okay, this is tough, kid. You want to get a massage? Yeah. Let's go eat that. Yeah. You want to go, if you have the means, go down to the beach for a couple weeks and just read. Yeah. Let's go out of our way, overcompensate. And while you don't want to make the feelings go away. It's like it's a bigger pond in a sense. So it passes more quickly. You can still feel them. You're just supporting yourself in the feeling of it.
Exactly. And that's the self-care. That's the self-care part of it. It's not about dismissing or denying or numbing out. It's about allowing and inviting and just allowing it to unfold and acknowledging. We don't acknowledge our pain. You said something very profound, and people, I witness people do it all the time, and I used to do it myself when people would say, how are you? I'm good. How are you? Fine. And what people really are wanting to say is, man, I'm having a really hard time. I'm going through this divorce and it's really overwhelming. And you can have those conversations without being, as you said, over dramatic and just dragging everybody down, but finding a sacred circle, a tribe of people, a trusted group of people who can support you, in a process. And sometimes that group is not necessarily your family, because sometimes families, we learn what we learn. And let's face it, if we are having a hard time processing something, it's probably because we picked it up along the trail,
It's probably never your family. It's probably, I would think, I know I'm not always a never, but almost close to never. I think it's your family of choice more, although I love my parents, and I know they'd be there for me to their capability.
Exactly.
But probably not at the level someone like you could, or some of my friends that I've cultivated a deep spiritual connection with.
Right. And, and that's the beauty in it. It's finding those people that you can just show up emotionally raw and naked with and go, here I am. And this is what I'm carrying today. And it sucks. And having them go, not the first thing out of their mouth is not, oh man, I remember one time when they say,
yeah.
I hear you.
Yeah. Let it land, not immediate transference.
Yeah. Just be heard. And then, obviously when people come to you with that, hear them, and welcome that. It's a true honor to help someone process through something that feels so overwhelming, because many times they don't quite have the tools to do it. And oftentimes, more than not, they don't even realize that they can do it. It's not about even having the tools. They've just never overcome. And I'm not a big fan of the absolutes either, but oftentimes folks just never really learn the tools to overcome anything that is in the grief arena. So it just becomes, well, that's life. Well, you got to be strong. Here, eat something. You're going to feel better. Just give it a little time. It'll heal everything, and we kind of brush it under the rug.
And it's such a medication-based culture, an avoidant culture.
Oh gosh. I'm actually doing a workshop in a few months. And one of the main things in there is I call them the gremlin sedatives. We have our little grief gremlins and all of our little anger gremlins and all the little things that are going on inside us that, people want to numb out to them. They don't want to feel them because they're uncomfortable. So they'll turn to food, sex, drugs, shopping, video games, social media. There's so many, and some obviously are a little more detrimental to one's, different, physical, emotional, mental well-beings. But, the name of the game for a lot of folks is just like, don't feel it. If you just ignore it, it'll go away. But it does not go away.
No, it grows.
It does.
And you're right. Some are more detrimental. Like I would say probably watching the Kardashians is worse than taking heroin.
I might have to agree with you on that.
In terms of they're doing studies on brain damage, and if you hear Kim's voice, what it does to your ears.
Yeah, is that what it is?
But what I'm hearing is when I hear all this, it's sort of like, why wait for the crisis? Isn't life richer if you have a great circle of friends, if you're already there for each other? Why does someone have to have a catastrophe to go give themselves permission to get a massage or go to the beach that they love or whatever, Why? Why wait?
And they shouldn't wait. We should not wait. But you know what they say about shouldn't all over yourself. I mean, because we have grown up generation after generation after generation, I do believe now there's more of a blanket wave that's happening where people are implementing self-care and they are using, their adult words, and they are stepping into ownership of their actions and their thoughts. But for years, it wasn't that way. So it's a really large ship to turn around, and it takes everyone being accountable for their own stuff.
What's the hardest part of what you do, Teri?
I would have to say the hardest part, or the most challenging part, is when I work with an individual and I feel at the core of my being their potential, and I feel their heart, but they can't quite reach it. They can't quite get there because they've got some huge stumbling block that generally fear that comes up for them. And it's not that they don't work through it. They do. And it's their journey. It's their journey to travel. But I always want for them to feel that peace, before they put themselves through the ringer. Because the reality is, if you make your way through life, to a halfway point, whatever your halfway point may be, odds are you've had a couple of pockets, pretty deep pockets, full of some pretty monumental pain. And if we just knew this ahead of time, as you said, we wouldn't have to necessarily experience all of this. And some folks will come to me and we'll do some work, and, it gets really close to that breakthrough and they're like, I can't do this. And then they'll come back a couple of months later and we'll start a different avenue, and eventually they'll get there. But for me, being on this side of it, I just wish they could see the potential that they have and the beauty that they are, the way that I see it.
You can see where there doesn't have to be the suffering.
Exactly.
And is it most of it come through some form of attachment?
Absolutely.
And the level and the depth of one's attachment would equal the level of suffering? Because we already know, once we get even remotely conscious, how temporary everything is, especially us. Everything.
Right.
And it doesn't make it any easier. I'm not saying it does. But for me, it sort of, when I wake up in the middle of the night, and that voice of the mind, which is temporary, says to the voice of the soul, why do we have to die? Mm-hmm. It's not fair, is it? And I was like, I have no idea why, but it is what it is, and there's nothing we can do about it, but we can't do anything about it tonight. But so, if anything, let's use it as a motivation to live and to not sleepwalk through this, because we don't know how many more days or weeks or hours we have left. So let's really be here and let's figure out what matters most and spend time with the people we love the most and do that.
Right. And what happens though, Paul, when people get to that place of ownership of their choices and their happiness and their path, what happens a lot of times is a lot of folks will take that as they're being a little egotistical or they're being selfish. I don't know if you've ever experienced that. A lot of times when we find our path and we start really implementing self-care and self-love, other individuals that have been around us and that are accustomed to us being one particular way have great issues with the fact that we're shifting because it brings up stuff for them. They don't want to have to shift. So
you nailed it. And also now you're not going to play the same role with them, and it's forcing them to change and shift with you, or they probably disconnect the relationship because it's just the deal. It's a different deal now. Right.
And you can, people, I tell people all the time, you can maintain a relationship from afar and send love and positive energy and hope, that, and see that individual in a healthier state. But any time that we go back and engage in that craziness, it's kind of like being busier than a one-legged man in a butt-kicking contest because we start this cycle of shame. It's kind of like, I'm never going to do that again. And then we do it. And then it's so, when you're triggered and you kind of get sucked into the drama and then you're in all that craziness and then you get, hurled out of it and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm never going to do that again. There's a cycle that folks have to, as I said, take ownership for. And that's really finding the roots of their grief, And like I said, grief is a sneaky thing. It can silently hijack our life when we are not expecting it.
Is shame tied into grief?
Shame is tied into grief. There's a difference, though. Like guilt is one of those things where we feel bad because we've done something to someone else. Shame is when we take that on as though we are the bad one. We have done wrong. We're the bad person. And grief is when we start to feed that shame gremlin, the ego will jump on board. And then the ego turns from being, yeah, you got this, you can do this, and everybody thinking that, you just think you're top dog. The ego then will turn on you and be like, I can't believe you thought you could do that. How dare you think you could get up and, yada, yada, yada. And then what happens is that starts to unearth all of the stuff that has never been addressed. How many people do you know? I know I've done it myself a couple of times, gotten in a relationship, and this one's going to be different, and then I realize I've attracted the same person that I attracted before, and nothing had shifted, just the players, different players in the game, but I hadn't taken that journey within and taken ownership,
Yeah, and if you don't become aware, then if you're running on the auto invisible radar, you are just going to keep remanifesting the same dream or nightmare, whatever you call it. Mm-hmm. You have to become aware enough. It's funny, I always feel like I'm boldly making all kinds of new mistakes. Yeah, mm-hmm. But they're not really mistakes. That's how we learn, But I still get tested, like the universal rollout. Hey, you sure you're over this? Oh, no, I've done that. I already know how that movie ends. But it's almost like I'm being tested like if you had a drug offense and they made you pee in a cup every few months, and somebody comes along and you just spot it right away. And you go, no, I'm not doing that. Yeah. Just because her hair's a different color doesn't mean it's different, So you have to stay vigilant. And in that is self-loving. And loving to them, too, not acting out that dance that they're so used to. You can break away by participating in a different form.
Absolutely. And then not taking it, personal if they have a different reaction, or not having an expectation of how they should respond when you do break away or, present yourself differently.
I like that. And also I always, someone asked me about shame and guilt, and I said, guilt feels like if you feel you could have done better or did something wrong and you feel bad about it and you apologize if you can. Shame is different, where it feels like it wasn't the action that was wrong. There's something wrong with you, and that's why you did wrong things. The difference between a poor choice and a poor, who you actually are, the core you. It's not seeing the deeper self. We do the level of our consciousness, and if we come to a higher consciousness and go, oh no, I can't believe I said that, I reacted or whatever. If you can, call them up and say, I'm really sorry, and then try to be more aware and do a little better. Right.
Yeah, the shame is it's deeply rooted. And shame, we're not born with shame. Shame is something that we experience and we adopt, and then we wear it. It becomes part of us. It's not that we've done anything to be shameful. There was and I don't remember the circumstances around it, but there was I was speaking with someone one time, and we're talking about the way that little kids, are like in church or, wherever they are. And she was telling me, she said, I was in church one time and I witnessed this little girl, like 3 years old, and, the choir got up and started singing, and the little girl got up and was like dancing in the aisles and spinning. And her mother said, "Stop it, you're embarrassing me," and jerked her back into the pews. And so she sat down. Well, instantaneously at 3 years old, this child has been told, you are an embarrassment. And what you do is will make other people look at me differently. So don't do it. And that's, the joy instantaneously is sucked away from us. And then we become very mindful at a very early age, that when we don't even know what mindfulness, really is in a 3-year-old, perception, not to do things because someone else will hurt. And we grow up with that tucked in our back pocket. And it manipulates lots of our decisions and lots of our, choices that we make in life, in relationships, in jobs, in moving away from home and going to school. We don't want to hurt other people. So we trade in living fully plugged in and living a rich, abundant life because someone else may look sideways at another individual. And really,
they become ghosts.
Absolutely.
Because after that person moves away, we're doing it for either mom or dad's voice in our head, or the girlfriend, the first one we had, or the mean-spirited art teacher, a music person.
Right.
And it becomes an ongoing obstacle that we put in ourselves to keep us from true joy, authenticity, and dancing.
Right.
Dancing in the rain.
Right.
Do you have a spiritual practice, Teri? What do you do to kind of stay? You sound so with so much equanimity. I almost feel like I'm going to call the monks in to start chanting behind this. There they are. Oh,
right.
You got the monks. This will be the podcast I'll recommend for people who call in a static state. I'll say, listen to Teri's calm as the monks chant in the background. Conducting this interview in the up here on the mountain in the temple of the Pauly temple. It was a very sacred with chanting Tibetan monks.
And we're only breaking silence for the week for this one interview, and then
for this 34 minutes or whatever we were going to do. We just first time Teri's spoken in years, and we just happened to have the. Could the monks hold it down a little in the background? Do you guys mind? I mean, for Christ's sakes, we're trying to do a podcast here.
Exactly. What is their problem, man?
I think all the chanting is somehow affect their hearing.
I think so.
Hang on, I want to scatter some rice over there for those guys. There we go. We're back. There they go. Now they're closing the door so that
they're
you don't
off
hear
on
less
the
of them.
alms now. We're good.
Yes, they're right. What do you do for your spiritual practice to be so peaceful? You obviously have a great sense of humor.
I meditate, and I do a lot of what I call meditation in motion. I find things that I love to do. Most people think it's bizarre, but I love to do yard work. And so for me, I will get out and do yard work and just really get in a place of oneness,
We're going to have you over.
Yeah, right? I mean,
put you out there in the gardens.
Sign me up. I'll come over to everybody's house and we can all do some meditation in motion.
There's some weeds over there in the corner, Teri, you missed.
That's right. But yeah, I think that, and you know what I think what happens, Paul, is I think that when you get in a place where you, at some point, all of the meditation and the mindfulness, it just kind of slides in and it becomes, that catchphrase, the new normal. And it just starts to be who you are. It starts to, not really who you are, but you tap into what you came here with, and it resonates and it recognizes, and then that starts to grow and replaces and gently shifts out all of the chaos. I have this, I say it all the time, it is what it is, and people will look at me and go, what do you mean it is what it is? It's stupid. And I'm like, it is what it is. I mean, why attach to it? It's your choice. It's your choice to attach to the static and the chaos and all that jazz or not. I just choose not.
I love it. And what I hear is similar to what I would say. I haven't really said it or thought it this way, but what you said by meditating, I'm a big meditator too, is that we expand the observer, which we experience as our deeper self in meditation. By practice, it becomes the observer grows and the egoic mind gets smaller in the world. So if we have more peace inside of us, then as calamities or challenges or whatever happens on the outside of us, we just are much calmer.
Right.
And what I have found, which is really kind of cool and magical, and I know there's probably, I think it's quantum physics or metaphysics, but the more and more peaceful I got within, the more and more peaceful my outer world became.
Mm-hmm.
Just maybe some of its choices, or just in general, there just seemed to be a nicer flow. Or it could be that when things didn't, in parentheses, work out perfectly, it was okay too. It was like, oh, well, I guess we weren't supposed to eat here today. They're closed for some reason. Or, God forbid, they were out of pie. Although that's a hard one. I still have to work through that one. But, but it's kind of, you just get more Zen-like. But that doesn't mean just like a robot staring off into space without emotions. You're alive, but it's expanded perspective or something. You just have more.
It is
more flow and a peaceful dynamic.
It is. It is definitely an expanded perception of things around you and also things within you, because you realize that when you see someone, maybe experiencing car rage or whatever it is that's going on with them, I typically go to a place of, I'm going to send you a lot of good energy right now because I know that whatever's going on with you is really unsettling. That's a far cry from honking your horn, flipping them off and saying, bite me. I mean, that's just, and lots of people do that, but what that does is that pokes the bear. We all have uneasy things that we've dealt with in life, and it's definitely not going through the world Pollyanna, and just being like, okay, I don't want to talk about anything. I talk about everything. I mean, I will meet someone and they're like, so what do you, I'm like, I'm an open book. You want to know, just ask. Now, I mean, it's all in moderation, but the reality is, I believe that when we step into who we are and we really embrace who we are, that's a huge gift, and it doesn't mean that you don't experience the occasional hiccups and come up on the crossroad and have to stand there and ponder which direction. But the reality is there are no coincidences. If the restaurant is closed, it's closed because you were supposed to do something else that day. And the likelihood is that you did something else and you made an impact on someone's life, or you met someone that touched you, and a whole new ripple was set in motion.
Ah, very similar. We've never really chatted before, so this is interesting. I have very similar philosophies, that a deep-seated belief that there is some divine organizing principle, energy, again, phonetics, that is working, a higher power that is working and working for the greater good, that it's, if whatever's happening is for my best, sometimes it's easy to see, like today's podcast, or other times it's kind of like, I wonder what's up. Mm-hmm. The universe is up to some mischief. Why is this closed? Or, that didn't work out. Like the great Garth Brooks song, Thank God for Unanswered Prayers. Mm-hmm. That relationship that we so wanted to work out didn't work out. Oh, we were so sad at the time, but now we're with the person who is much better suited for us, of no greater value, no less value, but just better suited. Mm-hmm. And I couldn't be happier. And if I'd married that other one, it would probably have been a much more contentious experience for both of us. So, again, some higher force is working. And we can also be human and react. You bang the knee, you yell a few obscenities, or...
Absolutely. Absolutely.
The donut shop's, closed. You break out in tears. And
just don't break the window. You can break out in tears. Just don't bash the window in, right?
No, never break the glass. That's one of the great spiritual... Jesus spoke of that, I think. Never break the glass.
That's right.
Or Buddha, one of the same guy. I like what you were saying, too, about... When I remember, I'm far from perfect, as everyone who knows me will gladly attest to on the Paulycast. But to not only expand the observer, but I realize that when I expand the observer, becomes a much more compassionate presence.
Yes.
You don't take things personal. The driver doesn't know you. The person with the drinking issue had it before you showed up, will have it after you. Mm-hmm. It had nothing to do with you. You just, for a while, you came across each other's path. I've recently had a mantra where everyone who comes to me is looking for love and healing. Mm-hmm. And that might just mean letting them tell their story, letting them go first in line, buying them a cup of coffee, giving them lunch, or just listening. Mm-hmm. There's a million ways. Or it might be walking away so they don't incur more bad karma, like, no, you can't have the credit card. It's not, you have to always be present and tune into the moment and make your best decision. It sure is fun. When it's working, it's so much fun to figure this out a little bit, mm-hmm. Just a little bit more than the old days where everything was like a pinball reacting, a vengeful universe that made no sense, mm-hmm. Totally focused on outward events, It's just a lot more freeing to just be in this flow.
I agree.
This flew by. We just did 40 minutes like it was 5 seconds.
Oh, wow.
You want to walk me through the 5 stages of grief while I grieve the ending of our wonderful podcast?
No, I'm going to tell you that there are no coincidences, which means that we'll do it again sometime.
I think so, because it's actually a very vast subject, and there's so much unacknowledged suffering, mm-hmm. unfelt emotions, unspoken words. This is what I hear between your lines. You've got to feel it, live it, say it. Otherwise, it's going to fester and it's going to turn into something not healthy, or some bad choice, whether for a partner or something to eat, or doctor's going to put you on pills, and that's a whole other thing, or chaos.
Well, and that's the thing. That unresolved grief will show up. We can bury it, stuff it, smother it, whatever we want to do to it. But it's going to show up. Our emotions will remind us. And whether or not you make a trip to the doctor and you find out you've got blockages in your heart, or they put you on blood pressure medicine, or you're diabetic, or you find out that you just you want 20 cats and you don't want to be around anybody in the world anymore. Not that there's anything wrong for anyone listening that has 20 cats, but I'm just saying, there's a human component of compassion that when we don't embrace that, we start to armor up and we numb out and we start to disengage from life. And that leaves us in a very uneven playing field.
Wow. You are very wise, Grasshopper. You're very wise. And the monks come back in. There they are chanting. Oh, you are very wise, Teri, very wise, Teri wise. You will definitely have to come back. I love you, laugh, joyful. Thank you. And
you are so welcome. I'm grateful.
You have just a wonderful presence. I almost feel like I should be speaking down here the whole time, saying, but it is nobler to feel the grief or to sling arrows against an outrageous bunch of reality television shows. To bear arms against the post office.
Just speak it.
Speak your truth. Right. Use the force, Luke.
That's right. But I would love to come back and talk with you and your listeners about all the many kinds. Because, I know we need to wrap this up, but there's the disenfranchised grief.
When is your TED Talk?
My TED Talk is October the 17th, not this Saturday, but next.
Let's have you back on post TED Talk, and you can talk about your TED Talk.
Yes.
And it's glorious how well it went. And then also, you can share about the multitude of levels of grief.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people who've been on the show are grieving that choice, and I think that you could maybe help them, or guests have, dealing with the different. You are wonderful.
Well, thank you so much. I am, I say this all the time and people get so tired of hearing it, but it's so true. I just am a reflection of your energy, and I am honored and so grateful that you had me on today. And, it's been wonderful.
You can't say it better than that, Polycast listeners. So God bless you all. I love that laugh. We will be back soon with another wonderful show. Until then, live the light and the love. Be yourself. Don't give up. Try, follow your bliss, and enjoy the moment. Love and peace.
Sometimes I thank God for unanswered prayers. Remember when you're talking to the man upstairs, and just because he doesn't answer doesn't mean he don't care.
This has been the Paulycast with your host, Paul Samuel Dolman. Please follow Paul on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And go to paulsamueldolman.com for the latest news and updates.